He was known for destroying lives without mercy. She was just a night worker trying to survive. But when Clara looked at Korea's most ruthless billionaire and asked about his pain instead of his power, everything began to fall apart. Welcome to Kim's Romance Stories. If this opening already has you hooked, please subscribe and leave a like. It truly helps. Share this with someone who loves strong, real-life stories, and turn on post notifications so you never miss new episodes. Thank you. Clara first saw Ha-jin Park from behind a glass wall that never opened for people like her. It was the kind of lobby where the air smelled expensive, where the floor reflected the ceiling lights like water, where security guards watched hands before faces. Clara stood near the reception desk holding a plain envelope with her documents inside, the paper edges soft from how many times she'd checked them on the train. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. Her friend Anita worked in the building's facilities team and had told her about a temporary opening for a night shift admin runner. Simple tasks, moving files, dropping off signed contracts to different floors, organizing boardroom supplies. The pay was better than any cafe job Clara had found in London, and the hours would let her keep her day shifts. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival. The receptionist looked up at her ID and then past her, already deciding who Clara was. Wait there. Clara waited. People moved in smooth lines around her. Men in tailored coats. Women with clean, sharp laughter. Someone rolled a suitcase across the marble like they owned the sound of it. Nobody looked at the girl in the thrifted blazer, the one whose hair was braided neatly but still carried the tiredness of commuting and trying too hard to seem calm. Then the elevator doors opened. He didn't step out like someone entering a room. He stepped out like a decision being made. Ha-jin Park walked with a stillness that made even movement feel controlled. He was tall, but it wasn't height that made the space adjust. It was the way the security guards straightened without being told. The way the receptionist's posture changed mid-breath. He wore a black coat with no visible logo. No flashy watch. No loud proof. He didn't need proof. His face was composed, but not soft. His expression carried the kind of restraint that looked like coldness until someone got close enough to feel the heat underneath. His eyes were slightly shadowed, like he didn't sleep so much as he paused. Two men followed him, both holding tablets like shields. Clara didn't mean to stare. She did anyway. Not because he was handsome, though he was, but because he looked like someone who hadn't exhaled fully in years. Ha-jin didn't look around. He looked forward, then slightly to the side, toward the reception desk, toward the visitor list, toward the envelope in Clara's hands. His gaze landed on her like a light turning on. For a moment, his eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in assessment. Like he was running numbers in his head. Then he looked away. And Clara felt the strange relief of being dismissed by someone who could ruin people with a phone call. The receptionist stood up. Chairman Park, there's a... Not now, Ha-jin said, voice low, Korean accent faint but present. He kept walking. Clara exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. Then the receptionist turned back to her like Clara was an inconvenience that had survived too long. You're here for the runner position? Yes. You'll be contacted. Clara knew that tone. It meant no. She started to turn away with her envelope still in her hands, trying not to look like rejection mattered, trying to keep her face neutral in the way she'd practiced in mirrors when rent was due and pride was useless. Stop, a voice said behind her. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Clara turned. Ha-jin had paused near the corridor that led to the executive elevators. One of the men behind him looked confused, like he didn't understand why his boss had stopped his own life for someone who didn't belong. Ha-jin looked at Clara again. This time longer. His eyes lowered to her envelope, then to her shoes, then back to her face. Your name, he said. Clara swallowed. Clara. A beat. Surname. Bennett. Ha-jin repeated it quietly, like he was checking the shape of it in his mouth. Then he looked at the receptionist. Why is she leaving? The receptionist's smile appeared instantly. Too bright, too fake. She was here about a role, sir, but... But what? Ha-jin said. She lacks certain requirements. Clara heard the lie in it. Anita had told her the job didn't even require a degree. It required being invisible and reliable. Ha-jin looked at Clara. Do you have the right to work? Yes, Clara said, too quickly. Then slower. Yes, I do. He held her gaze, then nodded once, like something inside him clicked into place. Put her on the list, he told the receptionist. Tonight. The receptionist blinked. Tonight, sir. Yes, Ha-jin said, already turning away. She starts tonight. One of the men behind him leaned in, speaking quietly in Korean. Ha-jin didn't slow down. His answer came without turning his head. Do it. That was the end of the conversation. That was how power worked. Clara stood still as the receptionist reluctantly took her details, typing with sharp nails like each click was a complaint. By the time Clara left the building, the sky had turned dark. The wind cut between streets like it was angry at everyone. She walked toward the station with her envelope tucked under her arm, mind replaying the moment again and again, trying to understand why a man like Ha-jin Park would notice her at all. The first night shift started at 10 p.m. Clara arrived early, wearing the only black trousers she owned and a plain sweater. Security gave her a temporary badge and pointed her toward a service elevator. The hallways upstairs were quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the building was holding secrets in its walls. She moved through tasks, refilling printers, dropping off folders, collecting signed documents from meeting rooms, trying not to make noise, trying not to leave any trace. She didn't expect to see him again. But at 12:34 a.m., when Clara stepped into the executive floor corridor with a stack of folders against her chest, she saw light spilling from an office that should have been dark. The door was half open. She hesitated. The office belonged to Ha-jin Park. Clara told herself to walk past. She told herself it wasn't her business. Then she heard it, something small and sharp, like a breath caught wrong. Not a voice. Not a call. A sound that didn't match the legend of him. Clara stood frozen, folders pressing into her arms. Inside, Ha-jin sat at his desk, suit jacket off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He leaned forward with his elbow on the wood, fingers pressed to his temple, eyes closed. For a second, he looked younger. Not soft, exactly, but worn. Like the ruthless CEO had been running on empty for longer than anyone knew. On the desk, his phone screen glowed with unread messages. Clara took one step back. A floorboard creaked. Ha-jin's eyes opened immediately. He didn't flinch. He didn't look startled. He looked like someone who'd trained himself never to be surprised. His gaze locked onto Clara standing at the door. "What are you doing?" he said, calm but edged. Clara lifted the folders slightly, hands steady even though her chest tightened. "I was returning these to records. I thought the corridor was clear." His eyes flicked to the folders, then back to her face. He watched her like he was reading between her ribs. Clara should have apologized and left. Instead, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "You look exhausted." Ha-jin's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. Like she'd stepped on a wire. "That is not your concern," he said. Clara nodded. "It isn't. Sorry." She turned to leave. "Wait," Ha-jin said again. Clara stopped, not because she wanted to, but because his voice didn't sound like a command this time. It sounded like a question he hadn't meant to ask. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "Why did you say that?" Clara's throat moved as she swallowed. "Because it's true." Ha-jin leaned back in his chair slightly, eyes narrowing. Not angry. Interested. As if nobody had spoken to him like that in years. He said, "Most people tell me I look strong." Clara didn't smile. She didn't try to charm him. She just answered. "Strength isn't the same as being okay." Ha-jin stared at her like she'd just handed him a mirror he didn't ask for. And then, for the first time, The ruthless CEO looked like he didn't have a perfect response. "Leave the folders," he said, voice quieter now. Clara placed them on the side table near the door. Careful, silent. As she turned away, she felt his eyes on her back. She walked down the corridor with her heart beating in her throat, not because she was afraid of him exactly, but because she'd seen something in him that was too human to ignore. Behind her, the office door remained slightly open, light spilling out like a warning. And Clara didn't know yet that she'd just become the one thing Ha-jin Park couldn't control. After that night, Clara learned the building had two kinds of silence. The first kind belonged to employees who didn't want trouble. They kept their heads down, their conversations short, their faces pleasant. They were careful not to be noticed too much, not to be remembered. The second kind belonged to Ha-jin Park. His silence didn't come from fear. It came from weight. Clara kept working her night shifts, moving through tasks like a shadow. She avoided his corridor whenever she could. It wasn't hard. The executive floor was mostly empty at night, and if she stayed busy elsewhere, she could pretend she hadn't said something dangerously honest to the most feared man in the company. But the building didn't let her forget. 2 nights later at 1:07 a.m., Clara was restocking the boardroom cupboard when she found a new item placed neatly on the shelf. A box of herbal tea bags, the kind that helped with sleep and stress, expensive and imported. It wasn't part of the company supplies. It wasn't on the inventory list. There was no note. Clara stared at the box for a long time, then closed the cupboard and told herself it meant nothing. Someone else must have left it. At 2:12 a.m., she delivered a contract to legal and returned past the executive floor, trying not to look. The door to Ha-jin's office was open again. This time, he wasn't slumped over his desk. He stood at the window with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in Korean. His voice was low, controlled, but even without understanding the words, Clara could hear the tone. Not anger. Finality. He ended the call and turned as if he already knew she was there. Clara stopped. Her badge felt heavy on her chest. Ha-jin looked at her for a moment, then nodded once toward the boardroom down the hall. "Tea," he said in English. Clara blinked. "Sorry." He repeated, quieter. "Tea." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a command. It was something in between, like he'd forgotten how to ask anyone for anything. Clara hesitated, then stepped into the boardroom. The lights were off, but the city glow spilled through the glass walls. She found the kettle, filled it, switched it on. Ha-jin followed, stopping near the table but not sitting. He watched her hands move with the kind of attention that made Clara feel exposed. Like every small habit, how she held the cup, how she stirred, was being filed away in his mind. Clara set 2 mugs down and opened the cupboard without thinking. The herbal tea box was still there. Her chest tightened. She glanced at Ha-jin. He didn't look surprised. "So it was you," Clara said, voice soft. Ha-jin didn't deny it. "You said I looked exhausted." Clara swallowed. "That doesn't mean you have to." "It means someone noticed," he said. That was the first crack. Clara poured the hot water, watching steam rise between them. She handed him a mug. Their fingers didn't touch, but the space between them felt electric anyway. He took it, eyes on her. "You're from Nigeria." Clara's grip tightened on her own mug. "Yes." "Lagos." "No." "Port Harcourt." Ha-jin nodded slowly, like he was tasting the difference. "How long in London?" 4 years. "And you work nights?" "Because rent doesn't care what time it is," Clara said. Ha-jin's mouth twitched, almost a smile, then disappeared. He took a sip of tea and looked down at the mug like he didn't know what comfort felt like anymore. Clara should have left. She should have kept it professional. But something about how he held the mug, too tightly, like he didn't trust warmth, pulled honesty out of her again. "Do you ever go home?" she asked. Ha-jin's eyes lifted. "This is home." Clara didn't laugh. She didn't pity him. She just watched him the way she watched exhausted people on late-night trains. the ones who looked like they'd been carrying things alone for too long. "That's not home," she said quietly. Ha-jin's jaw flexed. His gaze sharpened. "You don't know what home is to me." Clara nodded. "Maybe I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone is living inside a cage they built themselves." Silence stretched. Then Ha-jin said, "You speak like you're not afraid." Clara's voice was calm. "I am afraid. I just don't let it decide everything." Ha-jin stared at her for a long moment, then set the mug down carefully. "You should be afraid of me," he said, not as a threat, but as a fact. Clara's heart beat hard, but she didn't look away. "Everyone already is." Ha-jin's eyes narrowed. "And you?" Clara answered without thinking. "I'm more afraid of what exhaustion turns people into." Something flickered across Ha-jin's face. Recognition, maybe. Or pain. He looked away first. After that, their conversations became strange little meetings that didn't have a name. Sometimes it was tea. Sometimes it was a silent exchange of a folder at 2 a.m., his fingers brushing hers for half a second, both of them pretending it didn't matter. Sometimes it was just eye contact across a corridor that said more than words. Clara told herself it was harmless. Then she started noticing things. How the cleaners whispered when Ha-jin's name came up. How legal documents moved faster when he was involved, like everyone feared being the slowest person in his path. How an entire department manager resigned after one private meeting with him. How a competitor company's shares dropped overnight after a single public statement Ha-jin made with an almost bored expression. People called him ruthless like it was a weather report. Clara didn't know the details. She didn't ask. But she could feel the edges of something dangerous around him. One night, Anita pulled Clara aside in the staff room, lowering her voice. "Are you mad?" Anita whispered. Clara frowned. "What?" "I saw you near the executive floor. Don't start making friends up there. Especially not him." Clara's stomach sank. "I'm not making friends." Anita looked at her like she wanted to shake her. "That man doesn't have friends. He has allies and enemies. That's it." Clara tried to laugh it off, but Anita didn't smile. "I'm serious," Anita said. "People don't just work for him. They belong to him. Even the ones who think they don't." Clara felt a chill. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have that face," Anita said. "You look at him like he's a person. That's how people get hurt." Clara went back to work with Anita's words stuck in her chest. At 3:19 a.m., Clara was on the executive floor collecting leftover documents when she heard voices. Low, urgent, coming from Ha-jin's office. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The doors were thin, the corridor quiet. A man's voice said, "We can't keep burying this." Ha-jin's voice answered, colder than Clara had ever heard it. "You're paid to keep it buried." Another voice, strained. "If the board finds out." "The board finds out what I allow them to," Ha-jin said. There was a sound like a fist hitting a desk. Clara's breath caught. She should have walked away immediately. But then she heard Ha-jin again, and his voice had sharpened into something lethal. "Do you want to live," he said, "or do you want to be right?" A long silence followed. Clara stepped back slowly, heart pounding. The office door swung open. Ha-jin stood there, staring straight at her, like he'd known exactly where she was the whole time. Clara froze. Documents clutched against her chest. Ha-jin's gaze was unreadable, but his voice was calm. "How long," he asked, "were you standing there?" Clara's throat tightened. "I just arrived." Ha-jin studied her face like he was looking for a lie. Then he stepped closer, closing the distance until Clara could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne and something metallic underneath, like stress. He leaned slightly, voice low enough that it felt like it belonged only to them. "Some doors," he said, "should stay closed." Clara's pulse hammered. She nodded once. Ha-jin's eyes stayed on hers. "You understand?" Clara whispered. "Yes." Ha-jin held her gaze another second too long, then stepped back, letting her breathe again. "Go," he said. Clara walked away as calmly as she could, but her legs felt unsteady. The hallway behind her stayed lit, bright and quiet, like nothing had happened. But Clara's chest carried the knowledge now. Ha-jin Park wasn't just ruthless. He was hiding something. And somehow, in the middle of all that danger, he still left her tea in the cupboard like he wanted her to believe softness could exist in his world. Clara tried to put distance between herself and Ha-jin after that night. She changed her routes. She stayed on the lower floors. She avoided the executive corridor like it was wired with alarms. She told herself she was being sensible. But avoidance didn't erase what she'd already seen. Ha-jin's face when he asked her how long she'd been standing there wasn't the face of a man embarrassed. It was the face of a man calculating risk, weighing outcomes, deciding whether the person in front of him was a problem. Clara didn't want to be a problem. Then, 3 nights later, she found a note tucked under her staff locker. No name. No signature. Just a single line printed on clean white paper. "Do not go home alone tonight." Clara stared at the words until her eyes burned. Anita was off shift. The staff room was quiet. The air smelled like cleaning solution and stale coffee. Clara checked the corridor outside, then folded the note and slipped it into her pocket like it was contraband. All night, she felt watched. Not in the paranoid way that comes from fear alone, but in the specific way her skin tightened when she turned corners, like someone else had already decided where she would be. At 4:40 a.m., Clara finished her last task early. She told herself she was overthinking. She told herself the note could be a prank. Then she stepped into the service stairwell to go down to the ground floor, and she heard footsteps above her. Slow. Measured. Not rushing. Clara froze mid-step, hand on the rail. The stairwell lights buzzed faintly. Her breath sounded too loud. The footsteps stopped. A voice spoke from above, calm and unfamiliar. Clara Bennett. Her heart dropped. She didn't answer. The voice said her name again, almost amused. Clara. Clara backed down 1 step quietly, shoes barely making sound. Another step came from above, closer now. Clara's phone was in her pocket. Her fingers moved toward it, but she didn't want the screen lighting up in the dark stairwell like a flare. The voice continued. "Chairman Park's little night runner. I didn't think you'd be so hard to find." Clara's chest tightened. She turned and moved quickly down the stairs, trying not to run, trying not to panic. A laugh echoed softly. "Don't run. It makes it fun." Clara's instincts screamed. She ran anyway. She reached the next landing and pushed the door open into the corridor. The office floor was empty and silent. She sprinted past cubicles and glass meeting rooms, shoes pounding on carpet. Her mind flashed to the anonymous note, to Ha-jin's warning about doors staying closed. Clara didn't know where to go, but she knew one place had cameras, guards, and people who answered to someone powerful enough to crush others. She ran toward the executive floor elevator bank. The elevator dinged open, almost too perfectly timed. Ha-jin stood inside. Clara stopped so fast she nearly stumbled. Ha-jin's suit was immaculate. His expression was calm. But his eyes were sharper than she'd ever seen, like he'd been awake for hours without moving. Behind him, the elevator interior looked too clean, too controlled, like a private room inside a machine. Clara's lungs burned. "Someone." "I know," Ha-jin said. Clara stared at him, confused. "You know." Ha-jin stepped forward slightly. "Get in." Clara's body hesitated before her mind caught up. She stepped inside. The elevator doors closed. Clara's breathing filled the small space. Ha-jin didn't speak. He pressed a button that wasn't marked for staff floors. The elevator moved upward. Clara's hands shook. "What is happening?" Ha-jin looked at her, eyes unreadable. "You were warned." Clara swallowed. "Was that you?" Ha-jin didn't answer directly. He said, Who called your name? I don't know. A man. He knew my full name. Ha-jin's jaw tightened. Did you see his face? No. The elevator stopped. The doors opened into a private floor Clara had never been on. Quiet, dim, carpet thick enough to swallow sound. An office suite without signage, without company branding. Like a separate kingdom above the company itself. Ha-jin led Clara into a sitting room with dark leather chairs and a wall of glass overlooking the city. The view looked unreal, like London had been turned into a picture. Two men stood near the doorway. They weren't in suits. They looked like security, but not the kind that smiled at receptionists. Their eyes scanned Clara quickly, then returned to Ha-jin. Ha-jin spoke in Korean, short and sharp. The men nodded and stepped out. Clara felt her heart thundering. Why would someone come after me? Ha-jin walked to the window, then turned back to her. Because you're close enough to be useful, he said. Clara's throat tightened. To who? Ha-jin paused. In that pause, Clara felt something heavy behind his calm. He said quietly, there are people who want me weakened. Clara stared. So they pick me. Ha-jin's eyes held hers. They pick what they can touch. Clara's voice cracked slightly. I don't understand. I'm nobody. Ha-jin's gaze didn't soften, but his tone did. You're not nobody. Clara's chest tightened. She didn't know what to do with that. She hugged her arms around herself, trying to make her body smaller. Ha-jin stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance, like he wasn't sure what closeness meant with her. Tell me the truth, he said. What did you hear that night outside my office? Clara's breath caught. She didn't want to answer. She didn't want to be pulled into his secrets. But her safety had already been touched. I heard you say, Clara said slowly, that the board only finds out what you allow. Ha-jin's eyes narrowed slightly. And you asked someone if they wanted to live or be right. Ha-jin watched her carefully. Did you hear names? No. Ha-jin exhaled quietly, as if releasing a fraction of tension. Good. Clara stared at him. So what now? Ha-jin looked away for a moment, then back. Now you don't go home alone. Clara's voice was bitter with fear. So you keep me in a penthouse office like a prisoner. Ha-jin's eyes flashed. You're not my prisoner. Clara's chest rose and fell. Then what am I? Ha-jin didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. You're the person who looked at me and saw exhaustion instead of power. Clara's throat tightened. Ha-jin continued, quieter now. I don't know what to do with that. Clara laughed once, short and strained. Try leaving me out of your war. Ha-jin's gaze sharpened again. It's not that simple. Clara's eyes stung. It is for me. I didn't choose you. Ha-jin stepped closer, and for the first time, his calm fractured enough that Clara could feel emotion underneath. Not anger. Something like urgency. I didn't choose this either, he said. But I'm trying to keep you safe. Clara stared at him, breathing hard. Why? Ha-jin's jaw tightened, like the word hurt to say. Because, he said, I can't stand the idea of you being hurt because of me. The room went quiet. Clara felt her heart twisting, not into love yet, but into something that made her stop fighting for a second. Ha-jin's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, then at her. Stay here, he said. Clara's voice came out small. Are they still here? Ha-jin's eyes turned cold, the ruthless CEO returning like armor. They won't be. He walked out with a controlled pace, leaving Clara alone in the quiet room. Through the glass wall, London glowed. Through the door, she heard nothing. But Clara knew, with a certainty that made her stomach turn, that somewhere below, someone had called her name like she belonged to a game she never agreed to play. And the only reason she was still breathing was because Ha-jin Park decided she mattered more than his own peace. By sunrise, the building looked normal again. People arrived in coats and scarves, coffees in hand, faces half asleep. Emails would be sent. Meetings would begin. The company's surface would stay smooth. Clara sat in Ha-jin's private suite with a mug of tea she barely tasted, watching the sky lighten through the glass. She hadn't slept. Her nerves stayed wired, listening for footsteps that never came. Ha-jin returned at 7:18 a.m. His suit was still perfect, but his eyes looked darker now, like the night had cost him something. One of his knuckles was slightly reddened, as if it had met something hard. He didn't mention it. Neither did the two men behind him, who stayed near the door like quiet shadows. Ha-jin looked at Clara, and something in his face shifted, relief, brief and tightly controlled. "You're okay," he said. Clara's voice was dry. "Am I?" Ha-jin didn't answer that. He walked to the side table and placed something down, a new ID badge with her photo, higher clearance than she should have had, and a small envelope. Clara stared at it. "What is that?" "A safer arrangement," Ha-jin said. Clara's chest tightened. "I don't want arrangements. I want my life back." Ha-jin's gaze stayed steady. "Then take it." Clara blinked. "Take what?" Ha-jin's voice softened slightly, like he was forcing gentleness through habits built on steel. "The envelope. Go home. Move. Change numbers. Don't return to this building." Clara stared at him, shock rising. "You're letting me leave." Ha-jin's jaw flexed. "I'm telling you to." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Why would you do that if you're so controlling?" Ha-jin's expression tightened at the word. He didn't argue. He just said, "I'm not gentle with the world, Clara. But I can be gentle with you. If you let me." Clara swallowed hard. "You don't even know me." Ha-jin stepped closer, stopping just short of her space, as if he was careful not to trap her with his body. "I know you work nights without complaining," he said. "I know you send money home. I know you count coins before you tap your card. I know you braid your hair on Sundays because you don't trust anyone else to do it. I know you hide fear behind calm because you had to learn early that panic is expensive." Clara's throat tightened. "How do you know that?" Ha-jin's gaze didn't waver. "Because I pay attention." Clara felt heat behind her eyes. Not because of romance, not yet, but because nobody had ever been studied like that without being used. "And what," Clara whispered, "do you want in return?" Ha-jin's eyes softened for a fraction. "Nothing." Clara didn't believe him. "That's a lie." Ha-jin exhaled slowly. "Fine. I want you alive." The words landed heavy. Clara looked down at the envelope. Her hands moved toward it, then stopped. "You're making me feel like I owe you." Ha-jin's voice was quiet. "I don't want your debt. I want your choice." Clara looked up. "What choice?" Ha-jin's face held two people at once, the ruthless executive and the exhausted man behind the glass wall. "Leave and be safe," he said. "Or stay, and I will protect you. But staying means your life will never be simple again." Clara's chest tightened. "Is it simple for you?" Ha-jin's mouth twitched, not amused, just tired. "No." Clara stood up slowly, hands shaking. "Why are they targeting you?" Ha-jin hesitated, then spoke with an honesty that sounded costly. "My father built this company with help from people who don't exist on paper," he said. "Men who believed money meant permission. When my father died, they assumed I would inherit his agreements like I inherited his shares." Clara's heart beat hard. "And you didn't." "I refused," Ha-jin said. "I cut them out. I took contracts away from them. I turned them into enemies." Clara stared. "So they want revenge." Ha-jin nodded once. "They want leverage. They want to remind me that no matter how high I climb, they can still reach what I care about." Clara's voice cracked slightly. "But I'm not what you care about." "Not really." Ha-jin's eyes locked onto hers. "That's where you're wrong." The room held stillness. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Ha-jin stepped closer again, slow, careful, like he was approaching something fragile. "Clara," he said quietly, "I have destroyed companies without losing sleep. I have ended careers with one sentence. I have watched grown men beg and felt nothing." Clara's throat tightened. Ha-jin's voice softened further. "And then you looked at me and asked about my pain, like it mattered more than my power." Clara stared, breath trembling. "I don't know when it happened," Ha-jin said, "but I started waiting for your footsteps in the hallway. I started leaving tea where you'd find it. I started listening for your laugh, even when you tried to keep it quiet." Clara's eyes stung. "Ha-jin." His voice dropped lower. "I fell in love with you." The words were simple. No grand speech. No performance. Just a confession that sounded like it came from someone who didn't know how to be vulnerable without bleeding. Clara's chest tightened so hard she felt like she might break. She wanted to run. She wanted to protect herself. She wanted to believe love could be safe and not another trap. But then she remembered the stairwell voice saying her name like a threat. She remembered Ha-jin's knuckles red, his eyes darker, the unspoken violence he'd handled so she could sit in a warm room with tea. Clara swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "If you love me, why should I trust you?" Ha-jin's gaze held hers. "You shouldn't trust my power," he said. "Trust my restraint." Clara's breath shook. Ha-jin continued, quieter now. "I can be ruthless. I will always be ruthless to the world that tries to take what it has no right to touch. But with you, I don't want to be that man." Clara's eyes filled, and she hated that tears still surprised her. "You scare me," Clara admitted. Ha-jin nodded once. "I scare myself." Clara let out a trembling breath, then stepped closer, one small step, the kind that felt like jumping off a cliff. "I'm in love with you too," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "That's the problem." Ha-jin's face shifted like something inside him cracked open. His hand lifted slowly, stopping just short of her cheek, waiting. Clara leaned into his touch, choosing it. Ha-jin's fingers rested against her skin with a gentleness that looked impossible on him, like he was holding something sacred and feared breaking it. Clara closed her eyes for a second. "What happens now?" Ha-jin's voice was calm again, but different now, still steel, but wrapped in something softer. "Now I end this," he said. Clara opened her eyes. "End what?" Ha-jin's gaze turned toward the window, toward the city, toward the world that had teeth. "The people who said your name in the stairwell," he said. "The men who think they can reach me through you." Clara's stomach tightened. "How?" Ha-jin looked back at her, expression controlled. "By being more ruthless than they are," he said. "So you don't have to be afraid again." Clara's heart pounded. "And after?" Ha-jin's eyes stayed on hers. "After, if you still choose me, I will spend the rest of my life being softer with you than I am with myself." A knock sounded at the door. One of the security men spoke quietly in Korean to Ha-jin. Ha-jin listened, then nodded once. He turned back to Clara. "They found him," he said. Clara's throat tightened. "The one who followed me." Ha-jin's expression stayed calm, but the calm was dangerous. "Yes." Clara grabbed his wrist gently, holding him in place for a second. "Don't disappear into that side of you and forget me." Ha-jin looked down at her hand on his wrist, then back into her eyes. "I won't forget you," he said. "You're the only reason I remember I'm human." Clara released his wrist slowly. Ha-jin leaned forward and kissed her forehead, brief, careful, like a promise he didn't want to break. Then he walked out of the room, and the door closed behind him with a soft click. Clara stood alone again, tea cooling on the table, London bright outside the glass, and the sound of that stairwell voice echoing in her memory. This time, she didn't feel powerless. Not because the danger was gone, but because for the first time in her life, someone ruthless had chosen to be gentle with her, and had chosen to be ruthless again, only so she could finally breathe. They never spoke publicly about what happened after that morning. The news cycles moved on the way they always did. A private investment group dissolved overnight. 2 board members resigned quietly. A lawsuit disappeared before it could be filed. People inside the company whispered, but no one asked questions that could cost them their careers. Clara left the night shifts. Not immediately. Not dramatically. One day she simply didn't badge in again. She moved into a smaller apartment closer to the river, sunlight instead of fluorescent lights, mornings instead of midnights. She kept her routines. She still braided her own hair on Sundays. She still counted money carefully. Love didn't erase survival instincts. Ha-jin didn't try to change her. That was how Clara knew it was real. They learned each other slowly, outside glass walls and boardrooms. Coffee that went cold because conversation mattered more. Silences that didn't need filling. Arguments that ended without threats or power plays. Just honesty, sometimes clumsy, sometimes hard. Ha-jin was still ruthless with the world. Deals were made. Enemies stayed distant. His name continued to carry weight. But with Clara, he learned to rest. He slept more. Ate meals away from his desk. Laughed, quietly, like he was still unsure he was allowed to. Some nights, he held her like he was anchoring himself, not claiming her. Clara never tried to soften his edges for the world. She let him be sharp where he needed to be. She just reminded him he didn't have to bleed alone. They chose each other without announcements, without spectacle. Not because it was easy, but because it was deliberate. And in the end, that was what endured. Not power. Not fear. Not the empire. Just 2 people who saw each other clearly, and stayed. And that's the end of today's story. What do you think? Did Clara make the right choice by staying with Ha-jin, or should she have walked away while she still could? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who loves a deep, emotional romance with real stakes. Turn on your post notifications so you never miss when I drop the next story here on Kim's Romance Stories. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.